Coeliac disease, which is the inability to digest food with gluten, affects 1 in 70 Australians. One of those is my guest this week, Kylie Banks. She reveals how she found out she has coeliac disease, how many others might have it without even knowing, and what they can do about it.
Welcome to Signs of the Times Radio.
Well, it's great to have you with us here this week on Signs of the Times Radio, and joining me today is one of my good friends from the office, Mrs. Kylie Banks. How are you doing, Kylie?
Yeah, good, thanks. How are you?
Good, thanks. So we've had a few conversations in and around the office about various things that you do, and, I don't want to steal the thunder for upcoming articles or podcasts, but one that did particularly catch my eye is that you are gluten-free. Well, I'm gluten-free. I'm intolerant to gluten, but your experience with gluten is much more severe in that you have celiac disease. Am I correct there?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a raging celiac.
Yeah, that's right. And I know one time you mentioned to me that you've described it as such so that people take it seriously. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, these days a lot of people are gluten intolerant, and you go into a restaurant and you get a lot of gluten-free options. But with a celiac, it takes it to a whole new level. Gluten is poison for your body. It's not an intolerance. It's actually going to mess with your body big time, and it is. It's like poison for it.
Before we get into your story, I'm just thinking, because the times when I've gone to a cafe or the shops or whatever and asked for something gluten-free, you get the old eye roll, like you're one of those people who are just doing it for lifestyle changes. But for someone who's a celiac, it's like a severe problem. Is that frustrating for you, like going into places where people are gluten-free because of the trend and it's sort of shifting the way people view being gluten-free? Yeah,
look, I approach it now from a different angle, and I'm a newbie celiac. I've only had my diagnosis this year, but what I do now is I just don't even use gluten-free. When I walk into a cafe or a restaurant, I will say to them, I am a really bad celiac. What options do I have if I'm eating here? And some of them will look at me as if, what's celiac? And others of them know straight away because they know someone that's celiac, they've got a family member that's celiac, they have some sort of experience with it already. And so that gives me the opening then to know how to approach it with them. If I just straight out say, I'm a celiac, and just watch for their reaction, then I know how much I've got to educate them and how much I don't need to educate them. But I always err on the side of caution when I go in somewhere these days, because I can't afford to have any sort of gluten. It just messes with me for months.
Yeah, we'll go into some of those stories that you have to share in just a moment, because I know you've had some really bad experiences with it. But let's just dial back a little bit and talk about gluten. Now, what is gluten? Because, for example, I recently was making a pad thai, and one of the ingredients was rice vinegar. So I went to Coles and they had glutinous rice vinegar.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? Is there gluten in rice? But then I looked it up, and it's apparently gluten it's like describing something that's sticky, like the rice is sticky or whatever. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I can use it then. But so what is gluten? Where is it found?
Yeah, look, I'm probably not the best person to ask as far as all the intricate ins and outs of it, but it's present in wheat, basically, and it's a component in wheat that celiacs just react to very, very badly. So for someone like me, I can't consume it. I can't have it. I can't have my food prepped where any gluten there's traces of. I can't buy food that is produced in the same factory as gluten. So, for example, rolled oats, to my understanding, they don't necessarily have the gluten in them, but they're prepared in the same factory as what wheat do.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
So for me, I would need to buy gluten-free rolled oats, and they just happen to cost a small fortune. So it's not for me and for other celiacs, it's not necessarily just about that component being in your food. It's also about how your food's prepared, where it's prepared. And as a rule of thumb, I just remember that acronym BROW. So barley, rye, oats, wheat. They're the main things that you're going to find gluten in. And so I avoid those at all costs. And I then also have an app on my phone, which is from the Coeliac Australia Foundation. And if in doubt, like I'm always reading labels now, so if in doubt, I can look it up there and it'll very quickly tell me whether, yep, you can have that, or no, don't go near that.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that because you mentioned that even if it's made in the same factory, it might be a problem. Now, a lot of stuff that's sold will have may contain, gluten or is prepared in the same factory as gluten. Now, I always read that as a sort of a disclaimer so that if you buy something and you react to it by some chance or whatever, then you can't sue them. But when you read that label, do you automatically stay away from those ones, or do you take it as a sort of disclaimer thing that it is?
No, for me, I stay well away. So, for example, I was doing I've got a fruit and veg site that I purchase from. It's all like spray-free vegetables, and they stock pantry items and some frozen pre-prepared meals and that sort of thing. And they were advertising a couple of things as gluten-free. When they arrived, they're not gluten-free. They're prepared in a factory. The actual food might be gluten-free, as in no gluten present in the ingredients and stuff. But because it's prepared in a factory that produces gluten, or in a workspace where gluten's prepared as well, yeah, for me, I have to stay well clear of that. So for me, it was then a case of me contacting them and saying, hey, you can't actually advertise this as gluten-free. It's actually against the law because it's not. For a celiac, yeah, I can't have that. So, for me, I just had to give it away to the neighbour or whatnot. But for someone that's gluten intolerant, they could well be able to just tolerate traces of gluten.
So what happens to you when you accidentally eat even a little bit of gluten, or say, for example, if you eat more gluten?
Yeah, look, so since my diagnosis, I've had a couple of unintentional mishaps like that. I ordered some chips once and I thought I'd done all my due diligence, and it was early on in the day too. So you learn the tricks of the trade as you go along. There were not many options around at the time, and I didn't have any food with me, and I was starving. So I walked into the only place that was open was a pub, and I said to them, I'm celiac, I cannot have gluten, this is what happens when I do. Basically chips were my only option. I said to them, are your chips done in a separate fryer? Do you have just a dedicated chip fryer? Yep. We do, no problem. So, there's no batter that's going in there. So I thought I was pretty good. I was pretty safe. And they were good chips. They were really good chips. And I chowed down big time. I was hungry. They were good. I hadn't had hot chips since I'd been diagnosed, and they were superb. And I had them sort of in the afternoon. By that evening, I was feeling absolutely rotten, and quite literally, it took me a good 3 months to really put that behind me. And I would get everything from bloated stomachs. It feels like I have a football in there, 2, 3, 4 footballs sort of in there. Stomach pain, lots of going to the toilet, number 2s, and very soft too, I would become just so tired, just absolutely smashed. There's days where I couldn't get out of bed. I wouldn't be up until 7 o'clock at night, and then I'd be back in bed a couple of hours later. Also, really, really, really foggy head. So ineffective at work, at home. I've got a 9-year-old, and life's just really hard when you're like that and you're not performing. And yeah, it puts a big strain on my work. It puts a big strain on my family life, on my relationship with my husband, because someone's got to pick up the slack when you're like that.
Either you consumed a small amount of gluten, either that or the people who were selling the chips to you were careless. But if that was only a small amount of gluten, what would happen if you ate a large amount of gluten? Is it life-threatening?
If I ate it on a long-term basis, yeah, I'd develop all sorts of complications from that. So I really couldn't figure out what had gone on and why I was feeling so bad. So I went on and did some research, and turns out that a lot of chips have wheat added to them. And I'm not just talking, say, if they're battered chips, that's different altogether, but actually in the chip mixture. So they do it so that the chips aren't so stodgy. That's why they taste so good too. And yeah, so that, I mean, the people working there, they wouldn't have done it intentionally. They probably just don't even realise that their chips have wheat in them. And you can buy gluten-free chips at the supermarket now that you can put in yourself. And of all places, McDonald's, their chips are generally gluten-free. So yeah, look, basically just a teaspoon of gluten will take a celiac a good 3 months to get out of their system.
Because it's all got to do with the gut, hey, and how your gut absorbs that food, hey.
Yeah, so for me, I was diagnosed earlier this year, and I think according to the specialist, I would have had this all my life.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And interestingly enough, when the GP, I was just lucky that I had a GP who threw the net wide and, tested for a whole lot of things. And I remember getting the phone call from him and just saying, "Did you know you're a raging celiac?" They were his words, not mine. And I'm sort of like, what? Because it had never been flagged before. And I remember speaking to my mum later that week, and my doctor, said to me, yeah, with these kind of levels, you would have been a celiac all your life.
Whoa. Did you suspect that there was something going on before that point?
Oh, yeah. I honestly thought I was going nuts. My head was so fuzzy. I could not focus. I couldn't concentrate. I had the attention span of a gnat.
Was this all your life growing up?
No, off and on. So I remember calling my mum and telling her, and she was like, oh, well, that kind of makes sense. She said, because when you were a baby, you used to get all these really, really diabolical pooey nappies, and you'd get about 8 a day,
Whoa.
And we took you to a doctor, and he diagnosed you with a lactose and gluten intolerance. And they were living in Papua New Guinea at the time, so they'd taken me down to Ley. And apparently she said, oh, we put you on a special diet for 6 months, and it all seemed to clear up. So she thought I was fine and took me off the diet, as you do. So yeah, look, I think even though I haven't actually known it, I think I've always had just a gut instinct. But I think over the years, and I spent probably 5.5 years living in Asia, and then we moved back here. And in Asia, I didn't have a high glutinous diet. And then we moved back here. I think basically it was just the perfect storm. I was eating probably more gluten than I had been eating in a very long time. I had a lot of stress in my life coming from a lot of different places. And I just think that it just all got too much, and my body just got to the point where it literally wasn't functioning. It was like I was comatose. I'd get to 5 o'clock in the afternoon or whenever and forget it. So I literally thought I was going a bit nuts. I was ready to go and get myself tested for ADHD and all manner of things, because I really thought I was, I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't remember things. And normally, in the past, I actually have had quite a good memory up until childbirth. Your memory sort of slips on out with the child, But yeah, there was just a lot of things going on, and I literally thought I was going a bit loopy.
Do you think that your life has gotten better since you were diagnosed, now that you you sort of have some sort of control over how you react to gluten, or like trying to be more careful and the lookout for it?
Absolutely. Just knowing what's going on, I have a lot more control over how I feel. For me, my condition was so bad that when I actually walked into the gastrologist's office to see me, he actually said, "Oh, so you're Kylie Banks?" And I looked at him as if, yes. And he said, I looked at these results and just went, I've got to see this woman. And he actually, by the end of that consultation, I had to go in obviously for a gastroscopy. He bumped someone from his surgery list just so he could get me in to his next surgery day, because he could just see I couldn't function at all. I would run late for everything. My time management was just atrocious. I just was not coping with life at all. And when it came back, when I got my results back and I had my follow-up test consult with him, basically how he explained it is in your intestine, there's things called villi, and they're bumpy. It's almost like seaweed, if you can imagine that, in there. And at the end of that, that's what helps you absorb your fats and your sugars and those sorts of things. But in a celiac, those villi get so damaged that they're non-existent. Your intestine wall is just flat, is how he explained it to me. So for me, basically for 12 months, not only am I off gluten, but I'm off all dairy and I'm off all sugar, including unrefined sugar, fructose, all of that sort of stuff is just a no-no for me right now until my villi heal. And I was really lucky, and I think it's because I actually had a really healthy diet anyhow. But, celiacs, man, they can suffer from malnutrition because they're not absorbing the nutrients from their food, and that brings her around, they're susceptible to osteoporosis, kidney failure. I remember talking to a girl who she actually got diagnosed when she was 18, and she ended up in hospital with kidney failure and all sorts of things because while she was studying for her HSC, basically had a cheese toasty binge. That's all she lived on while she was studying, and didn't know she was a celiac, and completely and utterly did a whole lot of damage to herself and ended herself up in hospital. So, it's a serious thing, and it is an autoimmune disease, and there are plenty of complications that can come from that. You actually can be susceptible to a whole lot of cancers if you're not dealing with your celiac properly. There's a lot of stuff that your thyroid can go whoopee, all manner of things.
Those sound like very extreme things, and there may be people out there who are listening to this who react to gluten, but they're not sure if they're celiac. So in any of your research, have you come across what's the difference? Because there are quite a few people who are intolerant to gluten out there. For example, I know a lot of people, being that my parents are from Poland, I have like Polish connections, and a lot of people who come here from Europe have no issues with sourdough bread in Europe, but all of a sudden they react to it here. So my girlfriend and I go through Macca's and eat something we thought was gluten-free, and then she has like all this acne popping up because like, for example, my gluten-free thing is that I have a skin issue, dermatitis, because of my gut and how it absorbs gluten. But obviously at the same time, I'm intolerant to it because that's what my naturopath has told me, which doesn't mean I'm a celiac. It just means, if I eat it, my stomach will be bad. I'll have some of the symptoms that you described, but nowhere near as severe as you have it. So like, what's your understanding of the difference between celiac and intolerant?
Yeah, so as I understand it, given the right circumstances, the perfect storm, for want of a better term, and some of the key ingredients for that, consuming huge amounts of gluten for an extended period of time, a huge increase of stress in your life, things like that, you could go from move from being intolerant to full-blown
Really?
celiac. Yeah, as I understand it. And that's not to say that will happen for everyone, but if you already have a susceptibility to gluten intolerance, then it's something that you really do need to just go easy on. You know, it obviously is your body's way of saying, hey, I can tolerate a little bit of that, but don't overload me with it because it's not going to be good for my body. And I mean, you can always get tested. Initially, it's a simple blood test that you get. Celiac can't be diagnosed without a gastroscopy. So you can have the blood test and you can show up, you know, some pretty funky results on your blood test, but unless you actually go and get that gastroscopy where they actually go down in and have a look at your intestines and your villi and that sort of thing.
Whenever I go to a church like youth lunch or whatever, a lot of people are very accommodating of our gluten-free thing, even though there are those people who whinge about it and say that like gluten-free food tastes like cardboard or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I think that gluten-free food has come a long way. Probably the main thing I'd say about gluten-free food is, which you need to be careful of, is it often has a lot more or a lot of sugar in it to make it taste good, you know. So that's something to be just, I guess, mindful of. You think, okay, I'm eating gluten-free, I'm eating healthy, and to some degree you are, but oftentimes to make that gluten-free food taste nice, they've had to put a whole lot of sugar in it, or, you know, stuff that you really should only be having a little bit of in your diet.
If someone here is listening to your story and has been like, hey, I've been feeling like really tired, I've been reacting to certain foods and I've never really made sense of it or thought much more deeply about it, maybe I am gluten intolerant or maybe I'm a celiac, to that person, what would you say is like some good next steps to take?
Well, I would go and get the blood test done. You know, go to your GP and request that they give you a referral for the blood test, because if indeed you are that way inclined, whether it be gluten intolerant, but especially if it's celiac, you are going to feel so much better once your body is able to get rid of the last traces of gluten in your body and then start to repair itself and function.
Because it takes a few weeks for the body to flush out like any trace of gluten, right?
If you're celiac, it takes 3 months at least for your body to have, you know, worked through all that gluten. And 3 months, you know, that's a long time to feel rotten for. I just remember, you know, when I had that boo-boo with those hot chips, it just felt like it went forever and ever and ever. And I really did start to notice when I sort of turned the corner and that trajectory sort of started to head in the right direction. It was just like, yeah.
Sweet
okay,
relief.
Good, yeah. Yeah, because it's just a horrible place to be, and you don't have to live life like that, thank goodness. And the other thing is too, on a long-term basis, you can really do some serious damage to your body if you are feeling like that and it is in fact that you're celiac.
Now, for those same people who might have it or do have it and have recently found out, we're lucky enough that we have you here in the office who has gone through the hard yards of finding out your own research and all your own resources where you can get foods from. Now this is the time to sort of spill some of those beans. Some of those you might want to keep secret for Kylie's secret recipes. So where do you get the majority of your stuff? Like, this is assuming that our listeners are based in Australia, obviously. What are the sort of places you tap into to buy food?
Look, these days your supermarkets have, you know, a pretty good health food section in them. If you wander along to things like Harris Farm, you know, place specialty grocers like that, They often have some really good stuff. There are some great wholesale distributors now that distribute a whole lot of really, really good gluten-free stuff. And so going to a health food shop, you'll find some good stuff there too. For me, I'm always, because of some of the other businesses, that I have, I'm always on the lookout for really good food that's either whole food, gluten-free, that sort of thing. So Kez's Kitchen is pretty good, and they specialise in sort of gluten-free stuff. There's so much out there these days. I think you just got to make sure that if you are celiac, that if you're buying it online and you actually can't read the ingredients or read the fine print, as in, it might have traces of gluten, or you just got to really make sure that is actually food that's appropriate for celiacs. But you'll get some great little markets and stuff that you go to,
even vegan markets, hey, because a lot of vegan places, restaurants, markets sort of seem to be intertwined with the gluten-free sort of culture as well.
Yeah. And also Coeliac Australia have some great resources. For me, I actually became a member just for this year, just while I'm still trying to get my head around it all. And they actually send you a whole lot of food as part of your, like a box full of, bits and pieces as part of your membership package. Yeah, so that's always a good too. But I found just downloading their app, and because there are so many ingredients out there that you just go, what the heck is that? And just being able to quickly, as I'm whizzing around the shops or whatever, oh, can I have this? Look it up. Yes, I can, or no, I can't. That's really handy. And for me, my mantra now is, if I'm in doubt, don't have it.
Those are really good principles to live by. Like, one of the key pieces of information my naturopath shared to me is that the wheat in Australia is some of the worst in the world because of our terrible soils, which is why people like my girlfriend have no problem with sourdough in Europe, come here, have massive issues with it. So it's almost like, just on a final note, does it seem like there's way more people with these sort of issues around in Australia, do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've spent time living in London, for example. I've done 2 stints in London and travelled Europe a lot. And yeah, I would definitely say we have a whole lot more celiacs and gluten intolerance cases here than we ever do over there. And I've heard the same thing because of our wheat. It is mighty strong in the gluten content that it's contained in it. And definitely big yes to that. And it's a shame, although the good thing is, though, that we do cater for it more these days too. People are becoming a lot more aware of it. And if you're asking for something gluten-free, most cafes and food places will have an option for you. If you're celiac, you just have to make sure that they understand completely what's involved with that.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not just an intolerance, but it actually is a condition that you have and you cannot have it. So, they've just got to make sure that they prep it well. And look, 9 times out of 10, they're really accommodating and really good about it.
But you just have to make sure that, so that you don't run into that 1 out of 10 situation that will keep you out for 3 months. Yeah. You got to be really careful about it.
Yeah, it's your health, basically, and you got to be responsible for it. And so, you assume that they don't know, and that you're going to have to explain it to them, and you're really going to have to spell it out.
Hey, Kylie, it's been real talking to you. Always good to have a chat, but also a lot of important information there for the many people out there that I'm sure that are suffering from the effects of celiac disease or intolerances. So thanks so much for joining me today on Signs of the Times Radio, Kylie. Hopefully we'll get you on again soon to talk about one of your many other areas of expertise.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Today's episode was based on an article appearing in this month's Signs of the Times magazine. A subscription is just $26 for 11 issues a year. To find out more, visit signsofthetimes.org.au in Australia or signsofthetimes.org.nz in New Zealand.
This is an Adventist Media podcast.